değerli meslektaşlar ve saygıdeğer konuklar. Avrupa'nın en modern döneminde damgasını vurmuş seçkin bilim, insanlardan biri olan Dimitri Cantemir'in anısına adanmış birinci Dimitri Cantemir, Tarih, Kültür, Miras başlıklı uluslararası bilimsel kolokyumla hepinize hoş geldiniz diyorum. Bugün burada İstanbul'un tarihi Fener semtinde Fener Saray Panagia Ortodoks Kilisesi Vakfı Merkezi'nde bir araya gelmekten onur duyuyoruz. Cömert işbirlikleri ve misafirlikleri için vakıf yetkililerine en içten teşekkürlerimizi sunuyoruz. Aynı zamanda Fener Saray Panagia Ortodoks Kilisesi Vakıf Başkanı Sayın Merkezi'ne çok teşekkür ederiz. Bu kolokyum İstanbul Dimitri Kantemiroğlu Romen Kültür Merkezi tarafından bu gerekli vakıf ile işbirliği içinde düzenlenmiştir. Ve birçok ülkeden gelen araştırmacı ve uzmanı bir araya getiren Cantemir'in düşünce tarihi, klasik Osmanlı müziği ve benzer entelektüel mirasa katkıları yeniden keşfetmeyi ve onurlandırmayı amaçlamaktadır. Bugün oturum saat 14 ile 16 saatleri arasında gerçekleşecektir. Ve her biri Dimitri Cantemir'in mirasına özgü ve değerli bir bakış sunan 5 akademik sunumuna ev sahipliği yapacaktır. Etkinliğe başlamadan önce kişisel olarak katılmadığı için büyük bir üzüntü duyan İstanbul Dimitri Cantemir Romen Kültür Merkezi'nin müdürü Sayın Dragoş Dimitrie, onun sıcak selamlarını iletmek istiyorum. Sayın Dimitrie, kolokyumun başarılı ve ilham verici geçmesini temenni etmekte ve bu buluşmanın gerçekleşmesine katkıda bulunan tüm katılımcılara ve ortaklara derin şükranlarını sunuyor. Bu düşüncelerle kolokyumu resmen açtığımı ilan ediyorum. Ve ilk konuşmacımızı Sayın Mehmet Uğur II. Beyefendi'yi konuşmasını yapmak üzere buraya davet ediyorum.
Çok teşekkür ederim. Öncelikle Ankara'dan bir saat önce geldim. Biraz yorgunum ama çok teşekkür ediyorum buraya beni davet eden. Bütün organizasyonu görev alan kişilere teşekkürlerimi sunmak istiyorum. Bu sunumun benzerini bundan yaklaşık 1,5 sene kadar önce bir kreşte yapmıştım. Ama İngilizce yapmıştım. Bir Türkçe konuşmamı istediler. Ama İngilizce takip edebileceksiniz sunumu. Kantemiroğlu'nun müzik yönü oldukça bilinen bir konu. Kendisi İstanbul'da kaldığı zaman içerisinde müziğe ilgi duymuş, önemli müzisyenlerle çalışmış, tango öğrenmiş, müzik teorisi öğrenmiş. Daha sonra da bildiklerini bir teori kitabı ve nota kitabı şeklinde yazmaya girişmiş ve aynı zamanda da birçok eser bestelemiş bir kişi. Bunlardan biraz bahsedeceğim tabii ama daha çok değineceğim husus konuşmamda sonraki dönemlerde bunlar ne kadar benimsendi. Bu sonraki dönemlerde müzik kültürüne, müzik mirasına, Kantemiroğlu'nun ne kadar etkisi oldu. Bunlara değinmek istiyorum. Ve bunu 3 başlık altında ele alacağım. Öncelikle Kantemiroğlu'nun teorisyen yönü, yani nazariyatçı yönünden bahsedeceğim. Kantemiroğlu'nun bildiğiniz üzere oldukça hacimli bir teori kitabı var, müzik teorisi kitabı. Kitab-ı İlmi Musiki Alakacı Kurulfar isimli, yani harfler üzerinden müzik ilmi kitabı değişebiliriz Türkçe'ye. Burada kitabın 2 bölümü var. Birinci kısmı tamamen müzik kavramlarını açıklıyor, makamları açıklıyor, ritmik yapıları açıklıyor, ses kavramını açıklıyor. Ve kitabın 2. bölümünde de notalar var ki Osmanlı müziğinde nota kullanımı 19. yüzyılda yaygınlaşmaya başladı. İşte o dönem için oldukça kendine mahsus bir girişim Kantemiroğlu'nun yaptığı. Ona biraz sonra değineceğim. Şimdi kitabın ilk bölümünden söz etmek istiyorum. O zamana kadar Osmanlı'da müzik teorisi yazan birçok kişi oldu. 15. yüzyıldan itibaren Osmanlı müzik teorisi pratik bir anlayışla devam ettirilmiştir. Yani daha önceki sabit urmelik elemanına dayanan sistematik okul, biraz geriye gelirsek daha geçmedik çünkü bu konuya, burada kalalım. Daha önce oldukça akustik ve fizik yoğun bir şekilde müziği tanıtan kitaplar varken Osmanlı geleneğinde 15. yüzyıldan itibaren teorik kitapları daha çok makamların icrada nasıl bir seyir gösterdiğine yoğunlaşmıştır. Yani pratik bir gelenek zaten Osmanlı teorik kitaplarında vardır. Ama Cantemir burada bazı eksikler gördü. Bunun iki tane husustan bahsedeceğim burada. Bir tanesi o zamana kadarki teorik kitaplarında müzik holistik olarak ele alınmıştır. Yani bütün kainatın bir parçası olarak ele alınmıştır. Dolayısıyla müzikten bahsederken teorisyenler aynı zamanda gezegenlerden, vücut sıvılarından, vücuttaki deliklerden, günümüz saatlerinden de söz ediyorlardı ve müzik kavramlarını bunlarla bağlantılı olarak tartışıyorlardı. Yani makamlardan pratik olarak bahsetmekle beraber kitapların içerisinde bu şekilde kozmolojik, soyut parçalar da her zaman görebiliyoruz. Kantemiroğlu bir akıl çağı, aydınlanma çağı bir çağı insanı olduğu için bu tür geleneksel bilgileri kullanmaktan çekinmiştir kitabında ve tamamen müziğin uygulamalı boyutuna odaklanmıştır. Ve diğer kitaplarda gördüğümüz dini referanslar ve kıssalarla Kantemiroğlu edvarında bulunmaz. O açıdan bir yenilik getirdiğini söyleyebiliriz. Bir ikinci husus da diğer kitaplarda gördüğümüz bir eksiklik, düzeltilmesi gereken bir husus. Osmanlı teori kitaplarında şu uygulama çok yaygın. Modern döneme kadar, yani 20. yüzyıla kadar biz bunu görüyoruz. Önceden yazılmış teori kitaplarında bulunan bilgileri kopyalamak. Şimdi bu durumda o bilgilerin hangileri gerçekten o dönem müziğine uygun ve hala yaşıyor, hangileri geçmişte kalmış, bunu çok fazla eleştirel süzgeçten geçirmiyor yazan kişiler. Bu da hocalarından ya da gelenekten gelen bilgiler olduğu için bunlara saygı gösteriyorlar. Bunları da kitaplarına dahil ediyorlar. Cantemir ise tamamen uygulanan müzik ve kendi öğrendiği, kendi icra ettiği müzikten yola çıkarak teori kitabını yazıyor. Dolayısıyla kitabının önemli bir kısmında hep ala tabi hakir diyor. Yani benim görüşüme göre müzik böyledir, bu kavram böyle tarif edilir. Bir de ayrıca bir bölüm açmış, geçmişte nasıl anlatılırdı, geçmişte nasıl tarif edilirdi diye. Yani o ayrımı da net bir şekilde yapıyor. Cantemir'in getirdiği bu yeni yaklaşım, kendi döneminden itibaren diğer müzisyenler ya da müzik teorisyenleri tarafından oldukça verimli bulunuyor, benimseniyor. Ve Kantemiroğlu'nun verdiği bilgileri daha sonraki hemen hemen bütün nazariyat kitaplarına bir şekilde girdiğini görüyoruz. Burada ilginç olan şey şu, Cantemir'in adı geçmiyor. Cantemir'in adı ta ki 1880'lerde basılmış olan bir Yunan teorisyenin Paramythia'nın kitabında açıkça bir referans olarak bulunuyor. Ama ondan önce 18. yüzyıldan itibaren birçok el yazmasında gerek Kantemiroğlu edvarında doğrudan kopyalanmış pasajlar var, gerekse Kantemiroğlu edvarını alıp yeniden belki edit eden de diyemeyeceğim ama daha düzensiz bir şekilde çoğaltan Kevseri mecmuası üzerinden yapılmış kopyalar var. Bu şekilde yazılmış olan birçok kitap dünya kütüphanelerinde karşımıza çıkıyor. İstanbul Üniversitesi Nadir Eserler Kütüphanesi, Mısır, Londra gibi kütüphanelerdeki yazmalarda Kantemiroğlu edvarından bir şekilde geçmiş olan bilgileri görüyoruz. Ve 1864 yılında basılmış olan Haşim Bey'in meşhur Gülte Mecmuası ikinci baskıdır. İlk baskı biraz daha farklı. Orada da Kevseri Mecmuası üzerinden yine Kantemiroğlu'nun teorik bilgilerini bulabiliyoruz. Yani Kantemiroğlu'nun verdiği bilgiler daha sonra ciddi anlamda takdir görmüş, teorik kaynaklar. Oldukça basit bir şekilde, net ve yalın bir şekilde müziği anlatıyor. Fakat Kantemiroğlu'nun ismiyle beraber referans gösterildiği çalışmalar Türk teorisyenler tarafından 1900'lerin başlarından itibaren yazılmış ve yayınlanmıştır ve modern Türk müziği, Osmanlı müziği teorisinde de Kantemiroğlu en çok referans alınan kaynaklardan biridir. İkinci hususa geçelim. Kantemiroğlu'nun sonraki mirası etkilediği bir başka boyut, nota yazarı olması. Bahsettiğim gibi Osmanlı'da müzik sözlü olarak yürütülen bir sanat. Eserleri kayda almak bireysel gayretlerle gerçekleşmiş. Ta ki 19. sınıf ambargo kadar o zaman biraz daha kitlesel çoğaltımlar görüyoruz. Davul notaları var ama onu çok bilemiyorum. O yeni çalışılıyor. Ama bizim şu ana kadar çalıştığımız kaynaklar içerisinde 17. yüzyıldan kalma Arnavutluğun koleksiyonu sonrasında karşımıza çıkan ilk büyük nota koleksiyonu Kantemiroğlu tarafından oluşturulmuştur. Yaklaşık 1700 civarında, 1700 yılı civarında yazdığı bu notalar 350 eseri içeriyor. Bunların hepsi saz eserleri. Biliyorsunuz oldukça da pratik bir şekilde eserleri yazıyor. Her perdeye bir harf, altına da süresi. Bu şekilde çok rahatlıkla takip edebiliyorsunuz eseri. Bu orijinal notalar. Kantemiroğlu'nun el yazısı olduğunu tahmin ediyoruz ama o konuda net bilgimiz yok. Ama orijinal kaynak bu. Bir sonraki sayfaya geçersek, bu Tahran'da bulunan bir kopya. Bunun yaklaşık 20 sene içerisinde yazıldığını tahmin ediyoruz. Buna ilgili ben de 10 sene önce ilk makaleyi basmıştım. Burada 351 eser var. 329'u Edvard'ın aynen alınmış. 22 tane orijinal eser. Bunların içerisinde yaklaşık yarısı Kantemiroğlu bestesi. Ve hala çalınmadı onlar. Veya çalındıysa ben bilmiyorum. Çok enteresan eserler var burada o 22 orijinal eser içerisinde. Başka hiçbir kaynakta bulamıyoruz. Gördüğünüz gibi çok daha değerli toplu, daha süslü bir şekilde yazılmış. Muhtemelen ilk yazılan draft kopya, yani müsveddeydi. Bu ise temize geçilmiş hali ama burada da teorik kısım yok. Sadece notalar var. Bir sonraki sayfaya geçersek, bu da Kevseri mecmuası. Bu da yaklaşık 20 sene sonra yazıldığını tahmin ediyoruz. Yani o zaman zarfında yazıldığını tahmin ediyoruz. Burada 539 enstrümantal eser var. Yani bir müzisyen, Türk müzisyeni, Kevseri isimli bir Türk müzisyeni, Kantemiroğlu Edvard'dan 344 eseri kopyalıyor yine Kantemiroğlu notasıyla ve üzerine 195 tane eser ekliyor. Yani en azından bir Türk müzisyeni Kantemiroğlu notalarına ilgi göstermiş ve onu kullanarak hatır sayılır eseri kaydetmiş. Bunun da transkripsiyonu, tam notaların transkripsiyonunu yine ben 2016'da yayınlamıştım. İlginç olan şey, bu çalışmadan sonra Kantemiroğlu notalarını görmüyoruz. Benimsenmemiş, kullanılmamış. Ta ki 20. yüzyılın başlarında, yani 1890'lardan itibaren diyelim, önce Kevseri mecmuasında modern müzikologlar keşfediyorlar. Eski eserler, hiç bilmedikleri eserler ve çok farklı bir üslup. Rauf Yekta gibi, Hüseyin Saadettin Erer gibi modern teorisyenler buna çok ilgi gösteriyorlar. Öncelikle ilgi repertuara eski eserleri yeniden kazandırmış olmasından kaynaklanıyor. Ama daha sonra 20. yüzyıl boyunca özellikle son 30-40 senede müzikologlar bu kaynakları çalışarak repertuardaki ve icra pratiğindeki değişimleri ve devamlılığı takip ediyorlar. Bu açıdan da bizim için, bugün müzik tarihçileri için çok önemli bir kaynak. Ve buradaki eserler yepyeni bir repertuar oluşturduğu için bugün oldukça ilgi görüyor. Bizim bildiğimiz gelenekteki üsluba, tavra göre çok daha basit, takip edilir melodilerden oluşuyor o dönemin anlayışı, o dönemin müzik stili. Dolayısıyla bugün gerek Türkiye'de gerek dünyanın çeşitli ülkelerinde müzik grupları Kantemiroğlu'nun yazdığı notalardan eserler icra ediyorlar. Bir de son olarak Kantemiroğlu'nun besteciliğinden bahsedelim. Bir sonraki şeye geçebilirsek, hatta bir daha geçelim. Bunları anlattık. Evet, bestekar olarak sonraki döneminde nasıl etkilemiş Kantemiroğlu, biraz bundan bahsedelim. Şimdi ilk olarak teorisyenlikten söz ettik. Teorik bilgileri literatüre girdi ama kendi ismiyle yaşamadı. Sonradan Kantemiroğlu'na referanslar verildi dedik. Notaları çok daha az ilgi gördü ama günümüzde ciddi anlamda ilgi görüldü. Yani sonradan keşfedildi, yeniden keşfedildi. Ama bir besteci olarak Cantemir'in ismi kendi döneminden itibaren Osmanlı müzik camiası içerisinde tanınmış, takdir görmüş ve her zaman bir besteci, önemli bir besteci olarak Kantemiroğlu gelenekte yaşamış. Bunun izlerini sürebiliyoruz. Öncelikle ben size bir alıntı yapayım. 1912'de Kantemiroğlu notalarını ilk defa yayınlamaya teşebbüs eden Hüseyin Saadettin Bey, Kantemiroğlu besteci yaptığını şunu söylüyor. Osmanlı musikisine az çok müttesip olanlar, yani aşina olanlar, Kantemiroğlu'nun nam ve üstadanesini tanırlar. Yani ne kadar üstad birisi olduğunu bilirler. Bunu tanımayan yoktur diyor. Filhakika Sultan Ahmet Sani'nin zamanı saltanatında yaşamış olan bu bestekarın bize kadar gelebilen asar-ı musikiyesi hemen kamilen deha-i sanatına şahit olacak surette nefis ve metin parçalar. Yani bir deha, bir müzik dahisi olarak, bir deha besteci olarak tanımlıyor Cantemir'i. Cantemir'in kendi döneminden itibaren besteci olarak takdir gördüğünün ilk önemli izi 1751 yılında Fransız tercüman Charles Fontane'ın yayınladığı kitabında birkaç tane Türk müziği örneğin notaya almış ve onlardan bir tanesi Kantemiroğlu'nun peşleri. Doğrudan da başlığında Kantemiroğlu ezgisi yani de Cantemir ifadesini kullanıyor. Ve bu eserin bir varyantı zaten Edvar'da var. Demektir ki 18. yüzyılda Kantemiroğlu adıyla beraber kendi peşlerini icra edilmekteydi. Daha sonra 19. yüzyıl boyunca yazılmış Şampasyon notalarında da Kantemiroğlu adıyla kayıtlı çok sayıda peşler karşımıza çıkıyor. Bugün çeşitli ansiklopedilerde ya da Evgenya Bugazgücübesi'nin kitabında karşılaştığımız eser listelerinde Kantemiroğlu'na ait gösterilen 50-60 kadar eser var. Yalnız bu sayı biraz fazla abartılı. Çünkü eserlerin, oradaki listedeki eserlerin bir kısmı aynı eserin bağlantısı. Yani 2-3 defa aynı eser geçebiliyor bu listelerde. Yani Kantemiroğlu'nun eserlerin birçoğu unutulmuş. Bu da gayet normal çünkü müzik geleneği hep sözlü olarak unutuluyordu. Kantemiroğlu eserlerini bugün Bernardo'nun Kantemiroğlu eserlerini üç ana grupta incelememiz lazım. Bunlardan bir tanesi yalnızca kendi nota koleksiyonlarında bulunan eserler. Bunlar geleneğe çok sonradan girdi. Yani bizim dönemimizde girdi. Notalar keşfedildiği zaman çalınmaya başladı ve bazıları oldukça popüler hale geldi. Mesela Müserik peşleri gibi, Yüzük peşleri gibi, bugün Cantemir albümlerinde ve başka Osmanlı müzik albümlerinde karşılaştığımız eserler gelenekle günümüze gelmiş eserler değil, notalar üzerinden gelmiş eserler. Ancak gelenek içerisinde 19. ve 20. yüzyıl kaynaklarında karşılaştığımız aynı zamanda kendi koleksiyonlarında da prototipinin bulunduğu eserler var. Bunlardan bir tane ilginç bir örnek göstereceğim. Şu notalar vardı az önce. Evet. Sultani Irak Peşi. Bu Kantemiroğlu Edvar'da karşılaştığımız eserin ilk versiyonu. Yani 1700 civarında notaya alınmış. Kantemir'in notaya aldığı versiyonu. Bir sonraki slayta geçelim. Bu slaytı 20. yüzyıl başlarında yayınlanmış bir kitaptan aldım. Ve o kitapta şu ibare bulunuyor. Piyasa tarzıyla yazılmıştır. Piyasa tarzı dediğimiz lokantalarda ya da meyhanelerde icra edilen müzik, yani eğlence müziği anlayışı. Aynı eserin süslemeli bir versiyonu eğlence müziğinde icra ediliyordu. Bir sonraki slayta geçersek, bu da 1930'larda yayınlanmış Merkezi'nin ayetlerin koleksiyonunda bulunan yine aynı peşler. Tarz farklı, icra tarzları, üslubu farklı. Ama Merkezi'nin ayetlerin başında da aynı eserin çalındığını görüyoruz. Yani müziğin farklı ortamlardaki icrasında Kantemiroğlu'nun peşrelerine yer verildiğinin çok açık bir örneği bu. Biraz önceki slayda tekrar gelebilirsek, bilgilerin olduğu. Evet. Bu şekilde hem kendi koleksiyonlarında hem de 19. ve 20. yüzyıl koleksiyon kaynaklarında bulunan eserler Kantemiroğlu'na aidiyeti en sağlam bir şekilde belli olan eserlerdir benim için. Bir de yalnızca Hamfarsu veya Batı notası kaynaklarında karşılaştığımız eserler var ki bazıları meşhur eserler. Bugün Kantemiroğlu adıyla icra ediliyor. Mesela Pençkah Saz Semaisi gibi ya da Saskar Peşleri gibi mesela Kantemiroğlu'nun gelenekte en çok bilinen ve icra edilen eserlerinden biri. Bunların bir kısmının aidiyeti şüpheli. Ama bir kısmında da yanlış atıf olduğunu biliyoruz. Mesela Pençkah Saz Semaisi'nin bir prototipi Al-Müfki'de var ki Al-Müfki'nin 1650-70 arası yazdığını tahmin edersek kitabında henüz Cantemir doğmamışken o eserin olduğunu görüyoruz. Yani o eser Cantemir'in değil. Bir de Niharet Peşri var. Yine bugün albümlerde Kantemiroğlu adıyla çalınan bir eser. O da Kantemiroğlu Edvar'da prototipi başka bir besteciye ait gösterilen, sonradan bir şekilde Cantemir'e atfedilmiş bir peşe. Ama şurada söyleyerek bitireyim. Eserlerin bazılarının bu şekilde Kantemiroğlu'na yanlış olarak atfedilmesi de Kantemiroğlu'nun büyük bir besteci olarak algılandığını gösteriyor. Yani demek ki bu kadar önemli bir besteci bazı eserler ona yapıştırılıyor. Ortada bulunan bazı eserler. Dolayısıyla son slayda gelebilirsek, Kantemiroğlu 3 ayrı koldan Osmanlı kültürünü ve repertuarını etkilemiş. Nazariyatçı olarak etkisi anonim bir şekilde özümsenmiş yüzyıllar boyunca. Nota yazarı olarak uzun bir süre notalara ihmal edilmiş ama daha sonradan yeniden keşfiyle yepyeni bir pencere açmış Osmanlı müzik tarihinde. Bu için konuşuyorum. Ama besteciliği kendi döneminden itibaren sürekli olarak Osmanlı geleneğinde tanınmış ve takdir görmüş. Burada bitiriyorum. Çok teşekkür ederim. Bazı müzik örnekleri de getirmiştim ama herhalde vaktiniz var mı? Bir tane dinletelim bari. Açabilirsek mesela bu seriyi açabiliriz. Bu seri peşleri varsa orada. Bu seri peşleri Kantemiroğlu edvanında bulunan, sonradan unutulmuş ve notalar üzerinden yeniden keşfedilmiş. Bugün de en çok çalınan ikinci sıradaki peşlerinden bir tanesi. Çalan grupta Romanya'dan Anton Pan topluluğu.
Ben çok ikinci beyefendiye teşekkür etmek istiyorum ama Alina, Mehmet Bey hakkında birazcık bazı bilgiler var. Onları da okumak istiyorum. Doktor Mehmet Nur ikinci Uluslararası İlişkiler, Siyasi Tarih ve Türk Müziği alanlarında araştırmacı olup aynı zamanda kanun icrasıdır. Romen Üniversitesi Doğu ve Afrika Çalışmalar Okulu'ndaki Siyaset ve Uluslararası Çalışmalar bölümünde doktora derecesi almıştır. Halen Ankara Sosyal Bilimler Üniversitesi Bölgesel Çalışmalar Enstitüsü'nde de ders vermektedir. Kendisine teşekkür etmek istiyoruz. Programın ikinci konuşmacısına geçeceğiz. Profesör Doktor Vasilios Siros. İlk önce kendisinden biraz bahsetmek istiyoruz. Medici Arşiv Bölgesi'nin Provenza İtalya Erken Modern Yunan Kültürü Programı Direktörü ve ayrıca Cambridge Üniversitesi Tarih'in ömür boyu üyesidir. İsviçre'deki Basel Üniversitesi Avrupa Küresel Çalışmalar Enstitüsü'ndeki deli araştırmacısıdır. Araştırmaları Orta Çağ ve Erken Modern dönemindeki siyasi düşünce tarihi ve Erken Modern Avrupa ile Batı dışı toplumlar ve siyasetler arasındaki kültürel arası temas ve diyalog üzerinde yoğunlaşmaktadır. Profesör Dr. Vasilios Siros'un kendisinin sunumuna geçersek, onu bitirdik. Sunumunun başlığı Dimitri Kantemiroğlu'nun tarih teorisi ve erken modern imparatorluklarının yükselişi ve çöküşü üzerinde söylenir.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here. First of all, thanks to the Romen Institute of Istanbul, the and the foundation of the Of Panagia, the Greek of the church, now Panagia, and Mr. Vigas in French and all French. Thank you very much for the time. And of course, the personnel of the Institute, Mrs. Sheila and Mrs. Savino, for the wonderful recommendation of this great workshop and your hospitality. For the first time in the past 60 years, I've been asked to write my speech, my lecture. Normally, I don't speak with the paper. I'm very charismatic. So I'm going to read from this paper and those again the Turkish translation.
Yes.
And this is very strange for me, but it's always so this paper is about Cantemir's theory of history and how it looks at the growth and decline of the Ottoman Empire. This is a very interesting work produced by a great scholar of the 18th century. And it's precisely this context, the Ottoman context, that nurtured the thought, the ideas of this great author. So it's not accidental that Cantemir was in Istanbul, he lived in Istanbul, and his thought was colored, was nurtured by a number of intellectual forces, such as Ottoman political thought, Ottoman historiography, also European historiography, and theories about empires, and of course, in some regards, Cantemir anticipates, prefigures some other Greek theories, like in Bulgaris, write about the history, the evolution, and the decline and decadence of the Ottoman Empire. So we have to look at Cantemir's political thought and his theory about empires in this broader context. He's an author that is a confluence, the synthesis of all these traditions. And we have, of course, some very important sources produced in Italy about this very topic, this very theme, such as Giovanni Botero's Vision of States. Botero was a very important Jesuit political author, and a seminal figure of well-known in European intellectual history and life. And he is one of the first figures that talks about the comparative exploration of different forms of government. So he writes about different states, different polities around the world, and from there he extracts his own ideas and theory about how states emerge and decline. Of course, Botero's work is very similar to another work produced by a French scholar, Romen, about the birth, duration, and fall of states and empires. So we have here, as you see, a theme that runs through all these works, and this theme is the genesis and evolution, development, and decline of empires. And all these thinkers write about this topic from their own perspectives and backgrounds. So Botero was a primarily an economic thinker. He writes about economy. That's why Botero was supposed to be the progenitor of statistics in the early modern world. And his most important work is a Vision of State, written in 1589, which is a very interesting project to reconcile Machiavelli's theories about political power with the principles of the code of justice embedded in the Scholastic tradition. He tries to tone down Machiavelli's political theory. He tries to synthesize and harmonize the reconcile Machiavelli and some ethical approach to politics. So his interest is in the mechanics of power, and that also extends beyond the horizontal tradition. And another work, which is about the greatness, the quality of the greatness of cities. He talks about the historical and social forces that affect the rise, growth, and decline of the state. And later in his life, Botero produced a big work, very important work, the Universal Relations and Global Relations, which is about the social conditions, cultures, mores, and religious practice of more than 40 states, politics around the world. This is a very important work because nowadays you can go to Google and search about a certain state, like Maldives, for example, but in that time it was very hard to collect information about 40 states around the world. And Botero had access to all this information from different reports, from ambassador reports, from witnesses, travelers who traveled those places. So he was able to collect and distill that information from that literature. So Botero believed that although a city can seek to procure all the needs and meet all the conditions that are conducive to growth, it cannot grow forever. That's a very important thesis. So the growth of a city or a state usually stops, and its greatness and power dissipate. And so the city can be as the comfort is feels comfort at ease. Greatness depends on the remote cause for strenuous effort and bound to be ephemeral, temporal, because every person will seek out his own comfort and ease. So cities grow partly because of the inherent power of human beings, and partly because of the city's power, innate power, and ability to sustain their populations. Of these two, the generic power has remained incapable throughout the past couple of years, since human beings in this time were capable of reproducing as we were in the planet of multiple days. Therefore, with the race of humans who have been propagating and multiplying forever, and cities will be growing indefinitely if it were not for certain limitations. So Botero draws a conclusion that from this demographic stagnation is caused by a shortage of lack of food and other means of substance. And that once a city has reached a certain size, humankind has decreased, because of the fruits of the earth and the limitation when it comes to supplies. When it comes to economic decline, Botero believes that the city's provisions are acquired from its own territory, from land, or from abroad. And it seeks to expand, it needs more food supplies. So in order to secure reports from faraway places, from distant places, remote places, it needs to have a strong power of attraction, which can be surmount adverse geographical conditions, adverse propagation, recession, and outward neighbors and potential competitors. And these places from which the commodities originate, etc., and other obstacles arise when the free increase in its population needs. At some point, these challenges and problems become so difficult that they defeat every human effort and diligence. Versus the one guarantee of the harvest will be bountiful, and there are other challenges like piracy, etc., that impede the circulation of supplies and goods. So you see here, I'm not going to read the entire text because it's here in Turkish, but you see here that there has a theory that every state is subject to certain limitations. It cannot grow forever. And he dissects the different forces and factors, especially economic factors, that impede, lead to stagnation. And his prime example is, of course, Venice, because Venice was a big empire, as you know, Venice was very important in the Ottoman world as well. But at some point, Venice was facing stagnation in the 7th century. So all the thinkers were trying to grapple that phenomenon, trying to see why Venice was not developing further. And one of the reasons was that Venice had reached its peak, like the Roman Empire, for example, and it was declining. So one way to rescue Venice, to find a solution out of the problem, was to import people and increase the appeal, the attraction of the city. At the same time, Cantemir's theory lends itself to comparison with Ottoman theories, also right about decline from their own perspective, because we have thinkers in the Ottoman context that deal with the intrinsic anomalies of the Ottoman state, their time. And one very important source for those thinkers is in Khaldun, the famous Arab historian, who writes that states would go through dynasties. The first is a kind of state of nature, where people are raw, they're very hard, they fight, they create a state, but once they feel easy and comfortable, the state starts to decline. And that's exactly what's going on in Europe right now. We all feel very comfortable in Europe, we feel ease, that's why Europe is declining, very simple. And demographic decline is a very important symptom of this phenomenon. People feel at ease, people feel comfortable, they become soft, and they start to decline. They don't have the vigor, the motivation, the incentives to go further. So a very important thinker who writes about these questions in the Ottoman context was Paramythia in his work, The Line of Fraction and Rectification of Defects. That's a very programmatic work that outlines various ways of dealing, addressing those challenges in the Ottoman context. And it was written for a pencil, there was annotations, and so we used that before. I take that to say that outlines different ways of dealing with this problem. At the same time, Cantemir uses Greek medicine. He goes back to the Greeks and uses a number of Greek medical terms and notions about humans, about politics. So it associates the decline of the Ottoman state with the symptoms that occur in a sick human body. He also has the theory about the circle of justice, that no government can exist without richest people, and no rich people can exist without money, and no money can spirituality. So you see these very important parts of the state, but they're interlinked, interconnected. And he claims that with the different parts of the state, like the ulama, the learned, the army, the merchants, and the people, to respond to the different humors of the body politic. So we use here a very strong Galenic theory to associate how the different parts of the state interact with each other and how they are conducive to the growth of the state. The exact number of causes that led to the Ottoman decline. One was injustice, that early rulers or sultans were very careful to do justice, but this time there was corruption, there was uprisings, there was demographic decline. He writes that when he was traveling now the Ottoman realm, he would see that certain areas were desolate. They had no people around, so that was a big problem. And we had the same problem also in Spain. At the same time, when Shelley writes about the Ottoman Empire, we have people writing about Spain, and they detect the same problem that Spain is desolate, its own population. He doesn't only talk about the fiscal problems, the burdens of the state, but he also talks about the incompetence of certain administrators. So they try to bribe people, they try to bribe offices, etc. So these things they're all the cause of corruption of the state and degradation of political life. He writes about the different parts of through which the state goes through, and we have here, I think, the next one, the theory how to apply this theory. And he writes that he also implements 4 ways to address Ottoman decline. One is that the man of sword, a warrior, a man of general, or a man who leads the army, emerges and forces people to observe the laws, apply legislation. The second is that those who hold high offices, senior offices, in the Ottoman government, behave in a just fashion, and they practice a good example, a royal example for the people to imitate. They also run the affairs of the state, with the honor and glory of God. The third way is that the army commanders unite and seize power, and fourth is the ministers come together to apply justice and try to control expenditures, to bring down the expense of the state, and obtain the support of the military. Now, another figure that Cantemir is very close to, and in my presentation, when I think it's the first time somebody draws this link, is a very important Greek intellectual figure, Eugenius Bulgaris. Eugenius Bulgaris, as you know the James of Greek Enlightenment, and he wrote a very interesting memoir or report for Catherine the Great, in which he talks about his reflections on the current critical condition of the Ottoman Empire in 1772. So that was secret anonymously. There was no author mentioned on the cover of the book, and that was written in French, and then was a number of translations circulating throughout Europe. And there he talks about the degradation of the Ottoman Empire and how it will fall, which of the number of videos I will explain right away. So, in this work, Bulgaris, like Cantemir, uses the same methodology. He goes back to the past, he traces how the Ottoman Empire evolved, he uses a number of examples of rulers and sultans, etc. But he also believes that Europeans should be very cautious to dispel deep-seated bias against the Ottomans and Islam in general. So, in a sense, his work is a very interesting source of insights into the process of Reformation decline and the geopolitical and military situation of 18th century Europe. Also, in the interaction, the relation between Christian and Islamic worlds in the pre-modern period. So, in a sense, if we engage in a comparative study of Cantemir's and Bulgaris' decline, balance of power, and relation between Islamic empires and Europe, we can have a major project contribution to debates in Europe, especially in the West, about the role of Islam in Europe and how we can shape, reconfigure relations with Islam and the West. So, in this presentation, I tried to recreate the context of Cantemir's historical thought, try to identify possible sources and intellectual interlocutors. So, Cantemir is, in a sense, a very important bridge between East and West. And I think one of the reasons why Cantemir is so important, and I'm very happy to have this conference today, is because I think that Cantemir represents a very interesting case of a scholar, of an author of the 18th century, that British Western institutional traditional thought. At the same time, he's a very important transitional figure of dawn of modernity. So he writes in the 8th century, and he represents this period comes in throughout, like Montesquieu, etc. Also write about empires. So if we want to move forward with this project, I think one goal will be to revisit and to reassess the role of the Panagias as purveyors of learning in Cantemir theory of history. These are, of course, very important forces that shape his thought and also the very instrumental in shaping the Roman tradition of ancient history. We also have to revise and expand the canon of readings used in the historiography and standard knowledge to prevent rule of thought, and to retrieve neglected sources and genres of European identity. Because in a sense, Cantemir and all these figures were very instrumental in shaping European identity, serving as purveyors of learning from different traditions. To work on the intersection of the history of political thought, combined with theory, election history, and combined examination of political institutions, and look at the conceptual and rhetorical principles that work in diverse political traditions. And to talk about the rhetorical principles that and the relevance of the history of political ideas for normative and empirical political theory. So I would say that hope you love this opportunity for this conference, this workshop, that Cantemir is a wonderful example of how the European tradition interacts with Iran in the modern period. And I think Romania is a wonderful context, a laboratory or crucible which we can explore the interaction of these traditions. Also, the Greek tradition is very important. We see what we produce in an era where very people concerned about the future of various states and empires around the world. Thank you very much.
Profesör Doktor Vasilios'umuza teşekkür ederiz. Sözünü şu an Lokal Katerin Tarih Çanıldescu Beyefendi'ye vereceğiz. Evet, Nadejda Aleksandrovna'ya vereceğiz. Nadia Aleksandrova hakkında, doçent doktor olan Nadia Aleksandrova hakkında birkaç bilgi sizlere aktarmak istiyorum. Filoloji doktoru ve Bulgaristan Sofya Üniversitesi Aziz Kliment Ohirski, İslam Çalışmalar Fakültesi'nde doçenttir. Araştırmaları 18. ve 19. yüzyıl Osmanlı ve Balkan Edebiyatı ve Kültürü, duyguları tarihi, kadın tarihi ve anlamlama çalışmaları üzerine yoğunlaşmıştır. Bulgar 18. yüzyıl çalışmaları derneğinin başkan yardımcısı ve Sofya'daki ileri düzey çalışmalar merkezinin bağlı üyesidir.
Very much, Shema. I'd like to do this in Turkish, mainly motivlar, diğer meslektaşlarım, yanlarında kendi beyler. So thank you very much for being here for us. It's an honor for me to be here, and I'm very emotional today because thankful to Professor Dan Schmitzer and very thankful to Ms. Sheila Chelik and Anna for the organization of this wonderful meeting here. I've been researching this topic and Dimitri and Cantemir and just for about 5 years now, but it's the first time I presented here in the city where I lived for 22 years. So that's why I feel very emotional and very attached to many people. So in my presentation, I will be attention to Dimitri Cantemir's book, A System and Structure of Muhammadan Religion, in its Bulgarian translation performed by Bishop Sofroniu Trața. Since we are in Istanbul, a city in which Cantemir lived for so long, I decided to put special attention on Constantinople in this treatise. So my focus will be the city of Constantinople and how it is presented in the treatise. So first I will deal with the sources, the books, then I will write my thesis statement about Constantinople, and afterwards I'll describe a little bit the pattern of life trajectories of the two authors, their styles, and some conclusions. So as for the sources, the presentation will shed light upon these two books. So the first one is written in 1722, when Dimitri Cantemir was already in exile in St. Petersburg. So it was written in Latin upon request of Peter the Great. It was prior to the expedition of the Tsar in the Caucasus and the Azov Sea, when Peter the Great specially requested a printed book about the customs and the beliefs of the Muslim population in accordance with his plans for submission of these territories. The request fell within the domain of Dimitri Kültür, so he wrote the system and structure of Muhammad religion, published in the Synodal Printing House of Peter the Great. Unfortunately, a year later, Cantemir died. So this book didn't have a good fortune, and it remained unknown to the scholarly community, almost unknown for nearly a century. And then, about a century, 1805, Sofroni Wrocławski, a Bulgarian bishop, got a copy of the book and made a substantial effort to translate the treatise. He translated all the 6 chapters and just adapted the last chapter about the sciences. So it's a first full translation that appeared almost a century after the original. At the moment, Sofroni Wrocławski was living in the Umbro-Wallachia metropolitan in Bucharest and was in close relations with the fanatical ruler Constantinos Ixlantis. The two intellectuals had something in common. In that period of their life, when they wrote the work, they were in exile. They were feeling responsible for their own people, and they had expertise living in the Ottoman lands, since both of them had certain influence over the respective Moldavian and Bulgarian community. In the Ottoman lands, the religious identity mattered significantly. Therefore, the bishop wanted to provide enough religious books for the Bulgarian Christians that they are convinced of their religious affiliation to the Christian Orthodox Church. So, this is a city. Constantinople is a city in which both of those. Okay. And this is the slide about Constantinople. So, Constantinople in the late 17th and the beginning of 18th century was a place in which the distinguished Romanian intellectual Dimitri was living, and it gave him an opportunity to study together with most qualified scholars and performers. The Ottoman culture, and in particular the Ottoman culture, became very important to him to study languages, philosophy, theology, and as it was already shown, a lot of musical treatises. Cantemir had a first-hand experience of the political life in the capital, and he also had the opportunity to observe how the Muslim inhabitants of the city practiced their religion. Perhaps also due to his interest in international affairs, he also went to certain decades, he visited the villages, he listened to their music and tried to compose. His projections worked also vice versa, because when he wrote his treatises on history and on religion, he discussed music, he discussed their wishes, he discussed the decades, he discussed the riots and the customs of the Ottomans living in Istanbul. And most of the time it can be stated largely that Cantemir appears to admire actually the political structure of the Ottoman Empire, the architecture of Constantinople, and also the language. His writing style in the Sistema is a combination between ethnography, biography, and artistic eloquence. And the unifying perspective of all those 3 elements is actually religion. Cantemir's tendency to mix fact and fiction, really method imaginary dialogues, take up its origin in the historiographical and rhetorical tradition of antiquity. Sofroni Wrocławski, in his turn, tried to reproduce this style of translation and even kept the first-person perspective. which made the Bulgarian text sound not so much as a doctrinal document, but as a memoir, with explanations of religious tenets, customs, and rules. In addition, Sophrony also added his own comments at times, and then he also was influenced to write his own autobiography in similar style as the style of Cantemir. So here I would like to shed light about Sophrony's biography a bit. So Sophrony was born in Kotel, a mountain village on the southern slopes of the Balkan Mountain, to a family of wealthy Bulgarian livestock merchants, and his secular name was Stoico Vladislav. In 1762, he was ordained priest. He was a bookbinder, and he was very skillful as a hobbyist. In 1792, he moved from Kotel to Archiau, and then in 1794, he resided in Albanasi, where actually he received the bishopric. He also accommodated in Albanasi representatives of several noble families from Wallachia, such as Brâncoveanu, Băcărescu, and distinguished fanarios with whom he had close relations. Actually, his grandsons became very important fanarios too. One of them is based in Panagia. He is the grandson of Sophrony Brăceanski. So it wasn't really a surprise when Stoico Vladislav Sophrony Brăceanski became a really important figure. After really difficult times during his years as bishop, when he was captured and when he went to Vidin, visiting Osman Constantinople in Vidin, so he became a hostage of the Pasha, lived there for 3 years, from 18 to 1803. Perhaps due to his favors and then his good relations with the fanarians in Bucharest, he was able, after 3 years, to go to Bucharest and stay here until the end of his life. The Valarian ruler, Constantine Ipsilantis, paid Sophrony's debt to the Ecumenical Patriarchate for the time he was detained in Vidin. The Bulgarian bishop also participated in different councils and ceremonies in Bucharest. He was very active in the political sphere too. Starting in 1807, he was supporting the efforts of Bulgarians who were lobbying in Russia for the interest of the Slavic-speaking Orthodox population in the Balkans. In turn, chief Russian diplomats and generals endorsed his authority. During the last years of the Russian-Turkish War, he became an abbot of the Romen monastery in Bucharest, but towards the end of 1812, his health deteriorated and he was forced to retire. He returned to his family house in Bucharest and died in 1813. So those two intellectuals have similar life trajectories. So this sketch on Sophrony's biography displays several parallels with Cantemir's biography. These parallels can be interpreted in view of the motivation of the authors to write and translate the treatises of Islam, but there are much more common trends. So also Sophrony and Cantemir have a common background as Ottoman subjects. As we already perfectly know, the Cantemir reformer was the second son of the Voivode of Moldavia, Constantine Cantemir. He was a basic in Constantinople, a guarantee to father's loyalty to the Ottomans. Another similarity, and then the similarity between both of them, between them two, is that Sophrony Brăceanski was also an exile, and he also wrote works for the sake of his population back in Bulgaria. So both of them actually living in abroad were concentrating their efforts on writing scholarly books about their homeland. Yet another one is actually their fascination with Russian politics, their fascination with the Russian rulers, and their inclination to assist of the Russian rulers in their politics towards the Christians in the empire. So they also have scholarly projects in parallel. Dimitri wrote his system as part of a larger scholarly project that would encompass 3 volumes, one on the history of the Ottoman Empire, another on Muhammadan religion, and the third one on Ottoman institutional hierarchies. The plan was announced in a letter to the Foreign Academy in 1714, and eventually, as the things that we know is that 2 of them were written, one of them was published about religion, and the third one was probably lost during the campaign of Peter the Great towards these southern territories that he wanted to conquer near the Azov Sea. So Bronislav also had a plan to design a volume consisting of 3 parts, written intentionally in simple and short Bulgarian. So this is the codex from 1805, which is called the Book of 3 Religions, Книга за трите религии. It encompasses 3 treatises. The first one on Orthodox Christianity, which is a translation from Petr Movilov. The second one is on Jewish rites and customs, and it's a translation from Greek to Paul Medici's treatise on Jewish rites. And the third one is exactly Cantemir's treatise, Книга Система. Now these 3 treatises, he also had his only remaining original work, his autobiography, which later became a very influential text in Bulgarian history and Bulgarian literature of 19th century. As for the language, style, and sources of both authors, what can we observe? In terms of style and language, whenever possible, the Bulgarian translator rephrased Cantemir's pompous Baroque language. He wanted deliberately to write in a simple style in order for his fellow Bulgarians to understand him. So he often omitted sayings by ancient philosophers, by scholars whom he didn't know, and he preferred to quote mostly authorities and figures from the Bible and the sacred Christian texts. He made also compositional changes. He changed the place of certain chapters. He replaced chapter 4, moving forward instead of chapter 3. This was the logic that appeared interesting and meaningful for him. He also fragmented the book in a different way. Instead of 6 chapters, he wrote 128 different poems, different narratives. This was his own logic of decomposing and composing the text anew. And one very interesting feature, we don't know for whatever reasons, probably political reasons, so Bronislav just didn't mention Cantemir's name in the treatise. He actually wrote it as his own work. And when he's speaking in first person singular, it is as if it's around his work, but we perfectly know now that it's Cantemir's work. So he somehow wanted to disguise the name of to present himself as an author. Of course, he wrote an original introduction. He also added his own comments, but he, for some reason, didn't mention the name of the original author. And here is my short table of case studies that I worked on basis of my focus today of Constantinople. So what I observed is that even though the religious topic is dominating, there is also a syncretism, a constellation of these ethnographic features together with biographic features and together combined with features of arts and sciences, topics of arts and sciences. So I chose for you several case studies that I will just briefly mention. The first one, dealing with Constantinople, is that, of course, Cantemir recollects very often the time when he was there, and as this was like the the end of his life, a year before he died, he could hardly recollect all the sources that he once read. So he often quotes certain studies, but he quotes them by heart, and the quotations are not always correct. So he quotes something, and then it turns out that the quotation is similar to the actual saying. But he does this with utmost confidence, with his really great Baroque style. So in the end, the readers are really convinced that this what he wrote is true. Sometimes, of course, he confesses that he doesn't recollect very well what was exactly what he has read back then in Constantinople. And that's why he decides, whenever possible, to change the facts with his own words, his own memories. So this is, for example, the case with one discussion with a mathematician in Constantinople. He discusses with him maths and physics, but he's very respectful for the sciences that the mathematician knows. And in the end, he actually realizes that whatever his religion is, the religion coincides with hard sciences, mathematics and physics. As for music, I already mentioned to some of my colleagues and friends here that in the treatise there is this small special section on music and musical education. He believed that music should be studied by all fragments, by all milieus in the Ottoman society, and this is how it is studied, he said. So for him it was really very important that not only the elites studying music, but there are also different stratas to study and play and of course learn music. But he also connects the music with the divine. And he describes the Persian influences on music that are also influencing the Ottoman styles, and he relates astrology, mathematics, rhythmical structures with religion. And so here are my conclusions in the end. On the whole, these are the conclusions. So Cantemir and Sofroni shared similar profile of an intellectual and a politician with the self-awareness of his leading role for the enlightenment of their peoples. Cantemir and Sofroni also shared common practical knowledge of communication with the Ottomans. Yet Cantemir had also a theological upbringing, and for Sofroni, reading Cantemir was an experience by itself. Sofroni Lucianski's attitude to the subject was more conservative than that of Cantemir. Both Sofroni and Cantemir had been in Constantinople, but Cantemir spent much more time living there, and as what we know, Sofroni visited only once. Constantinople, as a city of power and interreligious interactions, was present in both the original and the translation, yet Sofroni often added his own comments, fables, adaptations, calling the city in the Slavonic term Zagrad, the city of the friends. So these are my conclusions. Thank you very much.
Şimdi Doktor Nadez'la Aleksandra Bay'a teşekkür ederiz güzel sunumu için. Şimdi diğer konuşmacıya geçiyoruz. Romanya'da Doktor Katarina Cevanescu. Müzik yoluyla kültür arası köprü Prens Besteci Kantemiroğlu isimli sunumu sunacak. Kendisinden biraz bahsetmek istiyoruz. Bükreş Ulusal Müzik Üniversitesi'nde araştırmacı olup, Romanya Besteciler ve Müzikologlar Birliği'nin stajyer üyesidir. 2021 yılından bu yana ulusal müziğin araştırmaları ve değerlendirmesine yönelik önemli kültürel projeler gerçekleştirdiği Red Ward Derneği'nin başkanlığı aynı zamanda. Ocak 2025 itibariyle Bükreş Ulusal Müzik Üniversitesi tarafından düzenlenen Melodos programı kapsamında Bizans müziği nota dizimi üzerine lisansüstü kursu yürütmektedir.
Thank you so much. I will stand for the start. It's a great honor for me to be here, and I must confess that yesterday and today were and are special days, especially because we benefited from the friendship and a warm welcome from our friends Alina and Sheila. Also, great thanks to His Excellency Professor Dragoș Tiberiu for this warm welcome. I'll speak today from a Byzantinologist perspective, and I must confess with sorrow that Dimitrie Cantemir isn't yet well known in Romania as it should be. In fact, very few specialists have tried to approach his work. Okay, I start to read. Dimitrie Cantemir was without any doubt a pivotal figure in the cultural and musical dialogue between the Ottoman Empire and Europe. Arriving in Istanbul at the age of 15, Cantemir engaged with the musical traditions of both East and West, as manifested in the Ottoman capital. As a disciple of the renowned Dimitrie Ahmet Çelebi, he received rigorous training in the Ottoman Makam system and compositional practice. Of course, you all know this stuff. His most enduring contribution was the development and application of a novel notation system for Ottoman art music. Therefore, his work transcends mere historical interest. For 3 centuries, Kantemiroğlu has endured as a foundational pillar of Turkish classical music. His notation allowed the first systematic transcription of an intricate repertoire. By capturing the primary oral tradition in a written form, he performed an active preservation, his enterprise being perceived today as revolutionary. By writing songs in a very precise manner, Cantemir preserved a significant corpus of 17th century compositions, including his own, thereby securing an indisputable foundational position in the historiography of Turkish music. His intellect, characterized by an insatiable thirst for knowledge, propelled him towards the pinnacle of Constantinopolitan learning. Cantemir's formal education reached its zenith at the Academy of Orthodox Patriarchate, venerably known as the Great School. This institution was far more than an official seminary. It represented the direct intellectual heir to the prestigious ecumenical school of the Byzantine Empire, embodying centuries of Hellenic Christian scholarly tradition. Under its roof, the Queens gained erudition and access to the broader circles of philosophical and scientific ideas circulating within the Ottoman capital. When he ascended to the Moldavian throne in 1710 as voivode, succeeding his father Constantine, he did so not only as a ruler, but as an intellectual refined by the highest cultural sophistication of Istanbul. During his formative years, the young monarch experienced significant exposure to European culture. As documented, he came in contact with prominent composers such as Georg Friedrich Handel, Nicola Porpora, and Giovanni Pescetti, as well as with celebrated castrati singers Senesino, Francesco Bernardi, or Farinello, Carlo Groschi. Within Constantinople, access to European embassies, often frequented by touring artists, facilitated Cantemir a deeper penetration into the intricacies of Western musical culture. As a result of his cultural encounters, Sieur Chabert, companion to the French ambassador Charles de Ferriol, published his Air in Western staff notation in 1714, as communicated by the composer himself. Particularly noteworthy is Cantemir's work on the acoustic ratio between tempered and non-tempered sounds. To demonstrate this practically, he reportedly constructed a mathematical instrument. This pursuit is a rationalized tuning system which invites comparison with contemporary European endeavors, such as Johann Sebastian Bach's pedagogical exploration in Das Volltemperir de Klavier, Johann Christian Hitler's tabulatura preludium, or Daniel Kroner's tabulatura fugum et preludium. While direct influence is unmovable, the parallel intellectual concerns are striking. Cantemir's culminating theoretical work in the field of Oriental music, the Book of the Science of Music, provides proof that he masters both musical cultures equally. prior to him, attempts to notate music remained largely fragmentary and inconsistent. Notation served as a secondary speculative exercise rather than a primary tool for practical musical transmission. His approach fundamentally altered this paradigm. Cantemir's system reflects a Western-inspired obsession of musical documentation. Music, in his opinion, must be accurately notated to enable reading, learning, performance directly from the score, and very important systematic preservation for future generations. His innovation wasn't merely technical, it was also conceptual. He sought to establish a codified theoretical framework based on musical literacy. This aims to modernize music pedagogy, placing it on a pragmatic foundation and to bridge the persisting divide, often reinforced by other theories, between abstract music theory and practical performance. His goal was nothing less than the reconciliation and integration of these traditionally separated domains through the power of systematic notation. In his work on Islamic religion, where he confesses that he studied over 20 years the practical and theoretical Oriental music, Cantemir says that the challenge of this music lies in the complicated reeds, for the performer needs a particular skill to play it. And I'll skip the citation for this. Prince Cantemir's theoretical framework integrated several novel elements, therefore. The application of alphabetic notation to Ottoman art music, a revised system for classifying melodic modes, the makam, detailed descriptions of characteristic melodic progressions drawn from the contemporary practice, and practical performance directives. He grounded his work empirically, relying heavily on extensive ethnographic engagement within Istanbul's vibrant musical circles, and leveraging his own expertise as a proficient tanbur player. This immersion in leading practice was central to his methodology, positioning his treatise as a reflection of then current performance traditions. Despite the declared break with the past, Cantemir's work exhibits a complex relationship with antecedent theoretical traditions. A notable paradox emerges. After arguing for the originality of his system and establishing a dichotomy between the old and the new theoretical approaches, he opens a chapter explicitly titled Treatise on Music According to the Ancient Manner. Within this section, he summarizes the inherited theoretical corpus concerning model classifications, scale structures, and transpositional principles as found in earlier textbooks, the so-called Advad. He presents these two streams, his own innovative system and the inherited Advad tradition, as distinct and not necessarily overlapping. This deliberate separation reinforces the old versus new as a central ideological tenet of his work, serving as a pointed proclamation of emancipation from established theoretical authority. Nevertheless, a critical analysis reveals that the Queen's new theoretical constructs were not entirely insulated from the pervasive influence of the very lineage he sought to distinguish himself from. Elements of the ancient theoretical transmission subtly permeate his innovative framework. However, his activities fostered at some point musical synthesis. His palace functioned as vibrant salons where the finest intellectual and artistic expressions of both cultures converge. At Ortaköy, for instance, his own Turkish compositions exemplified this synthesis. For this reason, Cantemir stands as an important agent in the transmission of Ottoman musical knowledge. He was both a product of Istanbul's unique, syncretic cultural milieu and a catalyst who actively shaped his musical trajectory, bridging traditions through composition, profoundly influencing the documentation and performance practice of Ottoman music for subsequent generations. Dimitri Cantemir's synthesis of Eastern and Western cultural currents was not only circumstantial, but stemmed from an active intellectual engagement with both worlds. He was a scholar, admirer of European culture, possessing a remarkable grasp of its historical development and philosophical underpinnings. This rather sophisticated understanding existed in tension and dialogue with his position as an excellent connoisseur of Ottoman cultural life. In what concerns Cantemir's compositions, these exhibit a distinct melodic idiom derived from the traditional sounds treasury of Ottoman art music. His melodies are characterized by brighter sonic imagery underpinned by established melodic formulae and rhythmic patterns characteristic of this tradition. Significantly, research conducted by the Romanian ethnomusicologist George Branson suggests that thematic material from Cantemir's work was subsequently assimilated and reworked within the European classical canon, notably in composition by Mozart or Christoph Willibald Gluck. Altogether remarkable is that some of his works were also transcribed into Byzantine music notation. Some specialists are arguing that the Moldavian prince must have been familiar also with this musical notation, with the Orthodox rite and its chants. Post-Byzantine musical manuscripts seem to point out to the fact that contemporary Greek Orthodox performers and composers were familiar with Cantemir's musical and theoretical works, some of them even writing down compositions of the Moldavian prince. The migration of musicians from Istanbul to the Romanian principalities facilitated the introductions of repertoire of various origins of the tradition, and the prince's compositions were no exception. The fact that the principalities were Christian and that church chanters from the two provinces and the Greeks in Istanbul were familiar with the same musical notation allowed for an easier introduction of not only religious chants but of secular pieces as well, such as Cantemir's song, which were copied in Byzantine musical manuscripts for more than 200 years. One of Cantemir's especially acclaimed work in the Balkans and in the Greek and Romanian-speaking world, Vai ce ceas, ce zi, ce jale, O the fatidic day and hour, O what sorrow, is part of church musician called Anton Pan, and it was printed in a collection of love and party songs called Spitalul Amorului sau Cântătorul Dorului, the Hospital of Love or the Singer of Longing, printed in the middle of the 19th century in Bucharest. The work must also have been well known and performed extensively in the Ottoman and Greek spaces in Istanbul, since another editor of secular music, Theodoros Fogaeus, includes it in the first volume of Pandora from 1843. A comparative analysis of musical manuscripts of different origins and in different notations, Ottoman, Greek, Armenian, from 18th to 19th century, from Istanbul as well and from other libraries around the world, continue to reveal the remarkable success which Cantemir's work enjoyed not only in Istanbul but in other geographical areas. And some conclusions. Prince Cantemir occupied a singular position as a cultural mediator, his perspective profoundly shaped by the immersion within the Ottoman world, while intellectually engaged with the Enlightenment currents from the West. He understood that grasping the essence of Ottoman culture, including its musical traditions, required insider participation. He recognized the Ottoman world as an integrated reality where religious, social, political, and economic spheres were inextricably linked. This holistic understanding provided a significant advantage over contemporary Western observers, particularly in apprehending the social contexts of Ottoman court music. While his political career as voivode of Moldavia was marked by significant setbacks, Cantemir's enduring legacy rests firmly on his groundbreaking contribution to the Turkish music. His compositions and the melodies he preserved through notation continue to be studied, performed, and revered within the Turkish classical tradition and not only. His work established a benchmark for compositional practice and theoretical understanding, securing his position as a paragon whose musical output has genuinely enraptured generations, of music admirers and still continues to shape the performance and appreciation of this art form centuries later. His legacy is above all a cultural one, cemented by his unique perspective and unparalleled art of musical and historical documentation. Thank you so much.
Böyle teşekkür ederiz. Sözü son konuşmacımıza veriyoruz. Doktor Vasilios Tsiodras. Onun hakkında birkaç bilgi vermek istiyorum. Selanik Aristoteles Üniversitesi Felsefe ve Eğitim Fakültesi'nde misafir öğretim üyesi ve doktora sonrası araştırmacı oldu. Aynı zamanda Atina Akademisi Orta Çağ ve Modern Helenism Araştırma Merkezi tarafından yürütülen 17. ve 18. yüzyıllarda yeni Helenizm'de doğa bilimlerinin tanıtımı Theophilos Konitaneus'un doğa üzerinde eserleri ve yazmaları başarılı proje araştırmacısı olarak görev yapmaktadır.
It is with sincere gratitude that I thank the organizing committee, the director of the Roman Cultural Institute, as well as Elena, and their dedicated team for the kind invitation and impeccable organization of this conference. As a historian of education, specialized in philosophical and Aristotelian thought in 17th and 18th century Istanbul and in the Ottoman Empire in general, I'm deeply moved to stand in the place of such rich historical ensembles. This residence, where now once home to the Roman rulers in Istanbul, is situated near the location of the Patriarchal Academy. This place embodies a unique intersection of cultural, educational, and ecclesiastical heritage, a symbolic meeting point between the ecumenical patriarchate and the legacy of learning. Being here today carries special significance for me both personally and academically. Dimitri Cantemir's history of the growth and decay of the Ottoman Empire stands as a critical source for the study of the societies and the culture in the Ottoman Empire. Of particular interest are the annotation that accompany the main text, rich in detail and informed by the perspective of a direct observer of the social and intellectual life of the late 17th and early 18th centuries, since Cantemir stayed here for 22 years. One note, titled The Fanar, is especially noteworthy for its concise, yet revealing overview of the educational institution of that time. Cantemir offers a synoptic appraisal of the Patriarchal Academy, highlighting not only its role in shaping Greek Orthodox Roman education, but also the stature of its instructors and the broader contribution of Constantinopolitan scholars to the intellectual life of the era. He notes that the academy was situated near the Patriarchal Church. It was founded by Manolakis of Kastoria in 1661, a figure of considerable wealth and influence. The academy's curriculum, 1691, he observed, was focused on philosophy in all its branches, the natural sciences, and the study of ancient Greek language. Yes. Cantemir enumerates the leading scholars and educators of the academy, appending brief introductory remarks to each name. His catalogue bears close resemblance to that of Demetrius Procopiou, whose register was published in 1721 under the patronage of Nicholas Montecordarius. Cantemir names 21 individuals, both ecclesiastics and laymen, philosophers and instructors, beginning with the schoolmasters and head teachers of the Patriarchal Academy. Ioannis Kariophiles, Valasios Kepophiles, Antonios Pandonis, and Iakovos Argeios. He concludes with the striking observation that Greece of his day had produced scholars scarcely inferior to the sages of antiquity. Among the scholars listed, most of whom Cantemir likely knew personally during his residence in the Ottoman capital, thereby lending his account particular value as a first-hand testimony. 3 of them are identified as his former teachers. Iakovos Argeios, whom he describes as a distinguished grammarian and philologist, from whom he was first introduced to the elements and the core of philosophy. Meletios, later Bishop of Athens, who instructed him in geography and mathematics over the course of 8 months, and Ieremias Kakavelas, to whom he likewise attributes his early philosophical education. Cantemir makes no further reference to Iakovos Argeios, the principal subject of this present study, nor have any letters addressed to Cantemir or reference to him been identified within Argeios' extant correspondence. Nevertheless, Argeios emerges as a key figure in the educational history of the early 18th century, having shaped the intellectual profile of the Patriarchal Academy through his long tenure as headmaster and principal instructor of Aristotelian philosophy and rhetoric. Recent research has provided a clearer picture of Argeios' intellectual formation and career. He was student at the Patriarchal School under Antonios Pandonis, tutor within the Mavrocordatos household. From 1692, he held teaching posts in rhetoric and philosophy, and from 1702 until his death, 1736, he was headmaster of the Patriarchal Academy. In 1707, the Ecumenical Patriarchate conferred upon him the honorary and rarely bestowed title of Supreme of the Philosophers. Approximately 50 letters authored by Argeios are extant, 13 of which are autographed, preserved in the archive of the Metochium of Holy Sepulchre, which once was the home of the library of the Academy. Most are addressed to the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Nikolaos Mavrocordatos, and Makarios Kalliras, the monk. The epistolary collection of Alexandros and Nikolaos Mavrocordatos are preserved 13 and 15 letters respectively addressed to Argeios, 5 of which are accompanied by his replies. While several of these letters have already been published, approximately 10, primarily among the autographs preserved in the Metochium, remain unpublished. It is also worth noting that Iakovos appears to be a scribe for Alexander Mavrocordatos' correspondent, particularly during the latter's final years, when he was the consultant of the Sultan Ahmed II. He also maintained intellectual ties with prominent Muslim Ottoman scholars, most notably Ali Esad Effendi, who had instructed Cantemir in Ottoman Turkish, and was a highly esteemed figure of this time, a librarian of Sultan Ahmed III, astronomer, astrologer, and translator of Aristotelian commentators. Argeios have translated from Ottoman Turkish into Greek several letters that Esad addressed to Patriarch Chrysanthos, a fact which suggests a relation of trust and sustained scholarly exchange among Esad, Argeios, and Chrysanthos. The corpus of Argeios' letter and related documents further shed light on his relation with the rulers of the Danubian principalities, meaning Constantine Brachioveanu and Nicolaus and Ioannis Mavrocordatos. Paul Brachioveanu, Argios composed in 1708 a formal encomium extolling the prince's noble lineage, pious work and political achievements. It reflects not only the practice of rhetorical composition at the Patriarchal Academy, but also a more intricate personal institutional relationship between the Constantinopolitan scholars and the Galatian rule. The text exceeds the bound of a mere rhetorical exercise. It performs a dual function. First, it casts Brachioveanu in the role of the ideal prince, a philosopher king, pious, committed to learning and politically prudent. Second, it serves as a gesture of political tact and gratitude toward one of the chief patrons and sponsors of the Academy. Despite the factional tensions between Mavrocordatos and Brachioveanu households, Argios appears to have exercised a form of cultivated pedagogical diplomacy, recognizing and honoring the cultural and material support offered by the Galatian ruler to the Greek Orthodox educational institution, the Roman institution of the time. The oration should not be viewed as a conventional expression of courtesy, but as an act of significant pedagogical and diplomatic symbolism, through which Argios sought to strengthen the cultural bonds and networks of solidarity between the Constantinopolitan and Romanian elites in the early 18th century Ottoman milieu. In the same vein, the composition of epigrams in classical Greek by Argios and other instruction of the Patriarchal School in honor of Constantine Brachioveanu reaffirms the deeper institutional and intellectual affiliation between the Academy and the Galatian court. These epigrams accompanied theological publication funded by Brachioveanu as formal expressions of gratitude. Argios and his colleagues actively contributed to the recognition of Brachioveanu's support for Orthodox ecclesiastical institution and learning production. As director of the Patriarchal Academy, Diakonos cultivated also a close and sustained relationship with his former student, Nicolaus Mavrocordatos, particularly during the latter's tenure as ruler of Moldavia and Wallachia. Mavrocordatos, recognizing the enduring intellectual authority of his former teacher, regularly informed him of his educational initiatives, which included the founding of schools within the principalities of Moldavia and Wallachia, requested the dispatch of manuscripts and scholarly books from Istanbul in order to continue his philosophical studies despite the demands of political office. Placed under Argios' supervision, he placed under Argios' supervision the education and moral formation of his sons, who remained in the imperial capital. These acts reflect not only Mavrocordatos' personal esteem for Argios, but also the latter's continuing influence within the intellectual and ethical life of the princely household. Mavrocordatos' formative years under the tutelage of Argios proved decisive in shaping his intellectual and cultural identity. In his correspondence, he recalls with poignant emotions the days of his youth as a student in Istanbul under Argios' instruction. He evokes with particular nostalgia the philosophical lectures delivered in an idyllic setting, a meadow in the outskirts of Istanbul, and describes the reading of books and the contemplative exchanges with his teacher as a source of profound delight. The bond between Archios and Mavrocordatos transcended the conventional boundaries of teacher and disciple, constituting a form of spiritual mentorship. A letter from Iakovos to Patriarch Chrysanthos, dated on the 13th, March 13, 1717, reveals something different. We found Iakovos in a delicate and constrained position in Bucharest. Following the arrest of Nicholas Mavrocordatos, November 26, 1716, and the ascension of his younger brother Ioannis to the Malachian throne on December 8th of the same year, Iakovos was unexpectedly detained in the city. The new ruler prohibited his departure, placing him in the state of involuntary confinement. This act was the result of hostile intrigues and slanderous machination originated within the entourage of the new prince. In response, Iakovos sought the intervention of Patriarch Chrysanthos to secure his release and facilitate his return to Istanbul, a request that in due course was granted. By December 1718, he had returned to the capital and resumed his academic duties. The subsequent year, 1719, however, proved to be exceptionally difficult for Istanbul. A series of powerful earthquakes struck Istanbul, causing widespread destruction, including the collapse of buildings, extensive fires, and damage to both residences and churches. Even more devastating was the outbreak of a plague during the summer and autumn of 1719, which resulted in extensive loss of life. Certain letters indicate that Iakovos' relation with Nicholas Mavrocordatos experienced a period of estrangement. Archios laments the prolonged silence of his former student from whom he had not received even a brief note. He attributes this rupture to defamatory accusation that may have influenced the prince's attitude towards him. In letters written after 1720, he further notes the cessation of the annual stipend he had formerly received, and he appeals to Mavrocordatos to re-establish their correspondence and reconsider his position. Despite the rupture, evidence suggests that reconciliation eventually followed. As headmaster of the Patriarchal Academy, Iakovos is later found encouraging his students to send letters of gratitude to the prince. These letters, however, are undated and lack external markers that would permit precise chronological attribution. Consequently, the exact duration of the estrangement and the timing of the subsequent reapproachment between the two men cannot be securely determined. A particularly revealing dimension emerges when one considers two encomiastic orations addressed respectively to Constantine Racoviano and Alexandros Mavrocordatos, as well as the letters in which Iakovos instructs his students to address the reigning prince in writing. Taken together, these documents disclose the portrait of the pedagogue who managed the political and diplomatic sensitivities of his era with discernment and restraint. These texts are not merely biographical or diplomatic in nature. Rather, they offer rare access into the intellectual and pedagogical environment of the Patriarchal Academy, where rhetoric and philosophy were systematically cultivated. They enable us to apprehend the broader educational and ideological climate of a critical moment in the history of Orthodox learning in Ottoman era. This study draws upon previously unpublished and understudied sources to illuminate the multifaceted relationship of Jacobus and Diogenes with the rulers of the municipalities. Ties that transcend the conventional confines of pedagogy and enter the realms of intellectual exchange, institutional authority, and political negotiation. The explicit reference by Dimitri Cantemir to Argios as his teacher confirms that the latter was far more than a headmaster of the Patriarchal Academy. He emerges as an active agent in the configuration of the Orthodox education across geopolitical boundaries, engaging students drawn from the upper echelons of power. Moreover, the sustained relationship between Argios and his former disciple Nikos Mavrocordatos is attested through continuous correspondence and direct involvement in educational matters. Similarly, the composition of the panegyric and epigrammatic verses in honor of Constantine Brachioveanu reflects a broader cultural logic in which education media function as a medium of a dialogue between Orthodox elites and princely power. This relationship presents Istanbul not merely as an academic center, but as a dynamic axis of cultural transmission and symbolic exchange between the ecumenical patriarchate and the courts of the Danubian principalities in the Tulip era of Sultan Ahmed III. Thank you very much.
Biz de Vasilios Theodoros'a teşekkür ederiz. Başka sorularınız yoksa etkinliğin sonunda İstanbul Federal Saray Panagia Rum Ortodoks Kilisesi Vakfı'na ev sahipliği yaptığı için tekrar teşekkürlerimizi sunmak istiyoruz. Özellikle Başkan Miras Beyefendi'ye. Sayın katılımcılar, bugünkü vereme sunumları ve değerli katkılarınız için hepinize teşekkürlerimizi sunarız. Bir sonraki etkinlikte yeniden buluşmak ümidiyle hepinize iyi günler dileriz.